August 22nd, 1981. The night was dark and muggy along the water as Jack Lankford watched his fishing lines by lanternlight. Suddenly, he got the feeling that he was being watched by someone or something. Roughly 20 minutes later, he looked up and saw two huge eyes, reflecting red in the lanternlight, staring back at him. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. And yeah, I just wanted to say, I know I posted about it because I was so frustrated. So my apologies for missing a couple weeks there. I had a bunch of episodes recorded, sat down to edit them for last week, and the audio was awful. So my roundabout whole story with this is that there is a silver lining to this spaceship or rain cloud, or whatever people say, and that is that I finally have hooked up a genuine microphone. So hopefully this audio sounds even better than it did before it absolutely went to trash. So, without further ado, today I'm really excited about this case. We are going to be discussing the fascinating case of the Knox County Booger. The first reported incident involved Terry and Mary Harper, who claimed to have woken up the morning of August 26, 1981, to find significant damage to their home. The Harpers lived with their children and dog in the small town of Decker Chapel, Indiana, and said that they didn't hear anything during the night except for the barking of their dog, over the loud sound of their fans going. Now, this wasn't unusual, as their dog would bark at who knows what during the night, and so they thought nothing of it, until the next morning when they found the poor creature shaking in fear and covering its eyes with its paws. As Terry left for work, he found that someone or something had actually ripped off the bottom of their door and torn pieces of aluminum siding from the house, leaving behind teeth marks, blood, and a tuft of dirty white hair. Knox County Sheriff's deputies were called to the scene and figured that it must have been a wolf due to the chewing up of the siding and, again, that tuft of fur. Now, before you ask what became of this tuft of dirty white hair or fur, investigating officers later informed Mrs. Harper that, unfortunately, it had been lost. The incident was reported in the Vincennes Sun-Commercial as vandalism caused by a, quote, dog, apparently. However, as time went on, images of the damage were actually sent to a local naturalist named Harold Allison, who claimed that the only animal he thought capable of such a feat would be a wolverine, and that there were no wolverines found in nature within 500 miles of Decker Chapel. It would be roughly a month later when a separate incident was reported and tentatively tied to the aluminum siding slaughter. On Saturday, September 19, 1981, a woman by the name of Barbara Crabtree was hanging up laundry in the backyard of her rural Knox County home. Technically, the home was right on the Knox-Gibson County line, near Decker Chapel, when her dog began barking. She looked up and saw a huge creature standing about 6 feet away from her. She said that this thing was roughly as tall as the cornstalk, so standing about 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in dirty white hair and with brown hair on the top of its head. She claimed that the face was kind of pinkish, with 3 big teeth and huge eyes. She said that it smelled terrible, almost like something rotting or decaying, and that it was growling at her, moving closer. She quickly gathered up her 2 young daughters and her 9-year-old son, who by this point had started throwing rocks at the beast, and fled into the house. Thankfully, her dog didn't let up barking at it and scared it back into the cornfields. Now, at this point in time, she actually did try to call the sheriff, but was unable to get through because the party telephone line was busy. However, this was not her only time to see this strange creature. A week later, the Crabtrees were returning from a drive-in movie at around 2:45 in the morning on Saturday the 26th. Now, Roger was driving and Barbara was asleep in the passenger seat. Suddenly, as they came off the bridge which spans the White River, Roger immediately saw what he referred to as this thing. Now, this thing was a 7 to 8 foot tall, hair-colored bipedal creature that was walking down the middle of the road. Roger said that it was colored like a wire-haired terrier, with silver dollar-sized eyes, long arms, and a gait that he said reminded him of an ape, kind of a skipping or swinging motion, as well as having human-like hands. Roger claimed to get a really good view of the hands as the creature actually swung at the car. He believed that the car lights had startled it, and he actually claimed that he had to swerve nearly off the road to avoid hitting or being hit by the creature. Now, at this point where Roger swerved the car, Barbara actually hit her head on the side of the car and woke up. Seeing the creature and seeing the situation, she yelled at Roger to get the hell out of there, as she recognized the creature from her earlier sighting. Now, Roger took her advice quite promptly and they hurried home, at which point they did call the Knox County Sheriff's Department. Apparently, the telephone line was not busy then, who came, investigated, and found absolutely no evidence that something had been on the road or in the surrounding brush. Apparently, a spot where the creature had wandered through was covered in almost knee-deep grass, something that should have shown if it was trampled, trodden, or otherwise traipsed through. But yet again, there was absolutely no trace. Now, according to the Knox County Sheriff's Department, several people around the area claimed that they had also seen and been extremely frightened by this, huge hair-covered creature, although no physical evidence was ever found. They were actually called again to the Crabtree home the night of Wednesday, September 30th. Barbara claimed that she heard a growling outside the house, so she went to wake Roger up. He quickly turned on the porch lights, at which point the noise abruptly ceased, only to start up on a different side of the home. The Crabtrees were so frightened by the creature that they actually purchased a shotgun and also began looking for a new home, Roger stating that he no longer went outside after dark had fallen. Now, while all the hullabaloo was going on about the Harper and Crabtree incidents, a man by the name of Jack Lankford came forward with his own sighting, which had occurred the night of August 22nd. Lankford was fishing on the White River, a spot he had often frequented known locally as Beaver Dam. Now, a quick side note, I did not know that this place was known as Beaver Dam when I started writing this episode, so any connection to my first and second appearances on my mom's podcast, The Great Beaver Fiasco, check them out on Spotify and Podbean, here on YouTube as Supper Club Media, anyway, is completely unrelated. Coincidental or synchronistic, you guys decide. Anyway, regarding the Lankford encounter, Jack had built a campfire a bit away from the bank and was watching his lines by lanternlight when he began to have the feeling that he was being watched. About 20 minutes after this feeling kicked up, Lankford looked up and saw these 1-inch diameter eyes, reflecting red, about 50 yards away and in the water. Now, when I say in the water, I mean that this thing was standing in the water. Lankford claimed that he saw a huge, humanoid, brown hair-covered body sticking up out of the water, and that it had extra long arms. The water was about 4 feet deep at that area, and then this creature's body was standing about 4 feet out of the water, for a total height of around 8 feet tall. Now, Lankford claimed that this thing just kind of stared at him. It was absolutely still, except for this kind of gentle tilting of its head from side to side, silently. Now, after a while, it finally turned away, and Lankford claimed that it pulled itself out of the water using a tree limb, finally making a noise at this point. He said that it sounded like this loud, high-pitched squeal or squeak. Now, eerily enough, Lankford claimed that he had heard this noise a couple of times since the spring, but didn't know what it was and didn't really think anything of it. As the creature turned away and proceeded to go into the brush, Lankford very quickly picked up all of his fishing stuff, hearing this strange squeaking noise one more time before leaving the area. Now, he told his family, including his grandmother, who referred to the creature as a booger, which is a well-known southern U.S. term for such creepy creatures that derives likely from the same root as boogeyman, likely derived from the Middle English bog or boog, also related to boggart, bugbear, buka. I love just words in general, but especially words regarding the paranormal or anything, creepy, because you can kind of almost like trace sort of the beliefs about it or where these ideas kind of evolve from in a way. So anyway, and the list with that goes on and on. So I won't subject you all to that right here, right now. However, he only reported the incident to his local Davis County sheriff when he saw these other incidents being reported in the papers. When I first dug up this case, I honestly thought it was going to be just kind of a rather quick Bigfoot encounter with maybe some subtle poltergeist overtones, but I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, nothing delights me more than, well, 1, the etymology of weird words, and 2, finding a subtle hint of high strangeness that kind of spins out into a much weirder and more complex case. Also, I did find that one newspaper called this thing the Knox Ness Monster, which, for as nonsensical as it is also pretty puntastic. Now, one of the coolest things about this case, in my opinion, is that again we kind of have this veritable Sasquatch flap, to borrow that term from ufology. And although this area had recurrent sightings here and there, what you have, around this time is this flurry of rather close encounters in a rather short time in a rather confined area, after which things subside to the typical here and there bout of anomaly. Kind of on this topic, this is a little segue, but I am forever intrigued by what really does constitute a flap, or kind of on the flip side of the dimensional spectrum, to borrow one of Keel's terms, a window area. Because effectively, a flap is simply a series of kind of heightened anomalies in time. A time where more weirdness happens in kind of a confined area, whereas a window area is a series of heightened anomalies in space, an area where things happen more frequently. Um, However, in my opinion, the only necessary component for anomaly is really an observer, which really makes the whole inhabited world susceptible to high strangeness. So, what do we consider a baseline of anomalous happens, a non-window area or a non-flap time, to then constitute, again, a time or place where more things happen? Do we even really need this baseline? I don't know. It's just something that I find intriguing. So anyway, segue over, moving on. Something that I find really interesting about this case is that aside from the Harper incident of the destroyed siding, which again, especially in the papers, a lot of people believed was connected to the sightings of this weird creature. But aside from that, what we have again is a very classic cryptid, this Sasquatch-like creature, that leaves absolutely no trace. Now again, it seems from the newspaper accounts that most people really did connect the Harper incident with the later sightings. And it makes sense, teeth marks, even the blood, the tuft of dirty white hair, you see this white furred creature. I mean, it even attracted the attention of the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, CITED, the foundation started by none other than Ivan T. Sanderson. Now, the CITED investigator really did believe that the damage was caused by Bigfoot. However, it's interesting to note then that the Harpers never saw or heard the creature themselves. However, the family that did have the recurrent sightings, the Crabtrees, were never able to find any sort of physical evidence to corroborate their sightings. Again, the very first thing that made this case stand out to me was the incident of the porch light, how Barbara heard a growling outside, Roger turned on the porch light, at which point the growling ceased, and then it began in a different and darker area. That really just stood out to me when I first came across this case because it calls to mind, to me at least, haunting or poltergeist phenomena, which ceases when the lights are turned on, especially even growling, something heard in so-called malevolent hauntings or, again, poltergeist cases. And, it's just intriguing that you have this, apparently some sort of creature or cryptid that's kind of following those same patterns. Two, this kind of goes back to that integral nature of light, whether mundane or extra mundane, in anomalous encounters. Another thing that intrigues me is that the Crabtrees lived right on the border between two counties, and that Roger's first sighting occurred immediately after crossing a bridge. Now, the concept of liminality in the paranormal is definitely a buzzword in the more high strangeness circles of research, and it's really odd to me how many times I'll be looking at just some random encounter and suddenly, boundary places or waterways kind of just pop up in relation to strange encounters. Of course, another great example is the infamous not-so-standard Sandusky Sasquatch encounter, which also occurred on both a county line and a river. Something about Barbara Crabtree's first encounter also really stands out to me. She claimed that this thing stood roughly 8 feet tall and reeked of decaying flesh. Again, this is a great nod to perceived malevolent hauntings and poltergeist cases, and for more information on that, I always have to mention Kuchin and Renner's fantastic books, Where the Footprints End. Great read, check them out. However, she didn't notice this thing apparently creeping up on her until her dog started barking at it. Now again, looking at other large primates, it is kind of eerie how silently they can move through brush. However, yet again, this thing supposedly reeked of decaying flesh and somehow managed to get within 5 or 6 feet of her before she didn't even notice it. Her dog had to notice it for her. That's something that seems odd to me, that it seems as though, was it creeping up on her or did it kind of just, manifest at that time? Regarding that concept of how this giant stinking thing could, creep within feet of the witness without her noticing, as well as the kind of bizarre lack of physical evidence to the cases where people saw it, and the abundance of physical evidence in the one case where the family didn't see it, This really calls to mind one of Keel's fantastic concepts, that of the transmogrification of energy. What if these things aren't necessarily totally physical or totally non-physical, but they are somehow kind of both, or they move through phases of physicality. Because so often it seems as though when we have, some sort of flap with these strange creatures, it seems like they pop up for a time, maybe they leave dubious physical evidence, but they don't always leave physical evidence, especially in cases where they traipse through mud or traipse through knee-high grass, and there's simply, no evidence of them being there. Um, so yeah, it seems as though these things kind of almost move through a spectrum of physicality before fading back into whatever other world they came from. Another really creepy small detail was actually pointed out by witness Jack Lankford, that the creature appeared to be watching him watch it. Now, of course, this could be just a common, animal or especially primate behavior, but it also falls neatly in line with the concept that I have been absolutely intrigued by recently, and that is of the anomaly observing the observer. Unlike Mrs. Crabtree, Langford experienced this kind of 20-minute lead up where he kind of felt like something was watching him before he even noticed this thing. Now, when he finally saw the thing that was watching him, it stayed put, tilting its head as though to make sure that he knew that it saw him. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Knox County Booger, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.